Welcome into the Andrew Garrison Show. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison, speaking to you from a bedroom in the state of Indiana with much to discuss this afternoon. It is 12:59 p.m. Eastern on January 7th, a Wednesday in 2026 at the time of recording this. It's a full episode on video for the first time in the history of this show. We did kind of a miniature version of the podcast a few days ago. It was right before the Colts game, so I was a little bit cut short. We got maybe 20 minutes, almost 20 minutes on Indiana women's basketball in just before kickoff of that game. Got to talk about the Minnesota game, the Michigan State game, and preview the Maryland game a little bit. And that's what we're going to open this show with. We've got 5 topics that I'm very excited about today. We'll open with Indiana women's basketball, talk about the loss to Maryland from a couple nights ago. We'll talk about the Indiana Pacers and kind of the crossroads that they're at with the center position. And we'll talk about the Colts. They obviously collapsed at the end of the season, recently revealed that they are retaining Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. Of course, shortly after that, John Harbaugh was fired, and there's maybe some complicating factors in there. But as far as we know, Ballard and Steichen are coming back for another year. And then a little bit later on, we'll finally talk about the Rose Bowl. It's been a busy holiday season. It's been a busy winter break, a busy couple weeks, lots of seeing family, lots of travel. But we'll get to talk about the Rose Bowl just for a short amount of time because obviously that's kind of out of the news cycle in the sports world at this point. We're all focused on the semifinals now. We're kind of done with the quarterfinals, especially the game that ended 38-3. But everyone I know that's an IU fan is still continuously discussing and talking about and celebrating this game. And so we'll talk about the Rose Bowl a little bit just so I can get some words out on it after not doing so, at least on this show, after that result's concluded. And then we'll talk about Steve Aird and the IU volleyball team because Steve Aird was extended. I think it's amazing news. I'm super excited about it. I kind of just want to praise Steve Aird and the volleyball program for a little bit at the end of the show before we get out of here because I'm very excited to see where that program is headed in the next few years and, throughout the next decade and beyond. I want to open, though, with the Indiana women's basketball team because there is a lot of news that sort of came out of this Maryland result. I said on the show the day of that game, I believe that was on Sunday evening, I was discussing, IU women's basketball. They lost to Minnesota. They lost to Michigan State. They're 0-3 in Big Ten play. They're now 0-4 in Big Ten play. But on the show, I was kind of discussing how this is around the time that we expected Zanius Okungumen to return from injury. And I said, kind of any game now, but I didn't think it probably was going to happen that night against Maryland. And sure enough, I turn on the TV, Odessa Noyan starting, right? I'm scrolling through X. I see Odessa Noyan starting. Okay, all normal. And then a few minutes into the game, Zanius Okungumen checks in. I see number 23 in red, and I left out of my seat. I was so excited because obviously this is kind of certainly going to accelerate the improvement of this Indiana women's basketball squad. They've really missed her in her absence with injury. And they kind of still missed her against Maryland. And, obviously a little bit rusty, a little bit slow to get going. She came off the bench, kind of easing her back into the season. So the low production, I believe it was 4 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists for Okungumen. Low production, totally understandable, especially right in limited minutes coming off the bench. First game after an injury that certainly significantly impacts someone's ability to play basketball and move, right? So totally understandable that you go from a scooter to a basketball court against the number 7 team in the country on the road. Obviously, you're not going to be nearly at 100% in that situation, but it was nice to see her on a basketball court doing basketball things, moving basketball movements, and playing the game and scoring buckets and gathering up rebounds and things of that nature. And as she improves both from a physical standpoint and just from a quality of play on the floor standpoint throughout the next few games, I think we're going to see IU, at least in that realm, return to its early season form when we saw them blowing out certain, Missouri S&T in the scrimmage and Lipscomb, right, and other teams competing with teams like Gonzaga, Iowa State, Florida Gulf Coast. When she was on the floor before that injury, we're going to kind of see a little bit of that front court presence and an offensive output from Zanius Okungumen again very soon, and I'm very excited about that. So that's, first of all, immediately what jumped out to me was Okungumen's playing basketball. I was so excited. I didn't really have anyone to tell, right? Because I'm here at home. Like I don't know a lot of people that are super invested in IU women's basketball, certainly around me. There weren't very many people to text in that situation. To put it out on X, I was so excited. Zanius Okungumen's back on the floor, and I'm excited to see where that progresses, obviously, as the season continues to progress. It was another tough loss, but it was one that I enjoyed watching and was kind of encouraged by, mainly, of course, as I mentioned, because Sokun Guman was back on the floor. Again, they stuck with a ranked opponent through at least half a game. In this case, the third quarter was when the bottom kind of fell out and the wheels fell off, and then Maryland pulled away. And that's something that we could kind of see coming. I was talking to someone at halftime, and I was like, I really feel like this is another one of those situations where, again, the bottom falls out in the third quarter, because you can kind of just tell that it's only a matter of time until the impeccable shooting tails off, and obviously Maryland would be able to pull away, especially as number 7 team in the country, and especially at home. IU shot impeccably well early on, and that's really how they were able to stay in the game. In most of the other aspects of a basketball box score, right, Maryland had a distinct advantage, or at the very least had a small advantage. IU was just shooting insanely well, especially on the road. Obviously, there's a little bit of a Yarden Garzone aspect to this, where she was on IU, she transferred, it's Terry Morin, it's Shea Chesky, it's Lene Beaumont, it's a lot of those pieces from that team last year. Obviously, Beaumont was injured, but you get the point. Yarden Garzone was the best player on this team last year. Obviously, she transfers, and now she's on the number 7 team of the country. There's a little bit of competitive spirit there, we'll say. I'm sure that was a real thing, both for Garzone and obviously for IU, Terry Morin, Shea Chesky, some of those other components of that team. But early on, IU shooting impeccably well. It had to have been frustrating for Maryland because they were defending Chesky very well. They were much better in transition. They were playing effectively a full court press for the entire game. They were much better on the glass, and Maryland was fighting for their buckets. They were working for their points, and IU would just pop a three from the left wing. It hits, right? The shot here, shot there, some of them a little bit ridiculous. Maya Makalewski hit 6 triples. And Makalewski's probably the third or fourth or fifth best scorer. I'd say probably third or fourth best scorer on that team, right? So you eliminate Shea Chesky, you're thinking about Beaumont, you're thinking about Chesky, Makalewski drops 20 points and is the leading scorer. It had to have been frustrating for Maryland, I can only imagine, especially through that first half before they were able to pull away. But that's the thing about basketball, is even within a game, in a given game, you can pull off an upset just by shooting the lights out for 4 quarters or 2 halves, depending on which side of the coin you're on in a given situation. But you can't expect yourself to just be able to shoot the lights out and then beat a top 10 team. And it's not like IU is expecting themselves to do that either, but there was an understanding as the game progressed that eventually this shooting is going to tail off, right? Eventually these field goal percentages and 3-point percentages are going to drop. And can IU beat Maryland in more ways than just shooting the lights out? The answer on this night was no. And that's totally understandable. You go on the road against the number 7 team in the country. No matter how well IU was playing this year, even if they were number 1 team in the country, losing to number 7 in this situation, obviously very understandable and acceptable. And again, I was encouraged because Makalewski, 6 triples, 20 points. Chesky scored 17, but was pretty noticeably limited for most of this game. Maryland did a great job defending her. Again, the full court press. And despite that, Indiana was still scoring and shot making. And again, a lot of that's just really hot shooting for Indiana early on. That shooting cools off. Maryland pulls away. That's kind of how the flow of the game began to become. Some stats for that. Maryland's successes were persistent throughout the game, but really showed themselves and manifested themselves in the third quarter as they began to pull away. 25 points off of 21 turnovers. Part of that's the full court press. Part of that's the oppressive perimeter defense, and part of that is the fact that that's exactly how you can stymie the Indiana offense. That's beginning to become clear to teams around the Big Ten, teams around the country, right? We saw Marshall do it. We saw UIC do it. If you press Indiana, right, if you pressure Indiana around the perimeter, this women's basketball team is probably going to give up possessions. And as a result, Marshall, UIC, and now Maryland have won the possession battle against Indiana because of that creation of turnovers. Now, Maryland's a great team in transition anyway. They're a great team in creating turnovers anyway. It's kind of a part of their identity anyway. But any team, right, can sort of adjust their philosophy a little bit, adjust their approach to Indiana a little bit to kind of cater to that weakness that Indiana may have from a turnover perspective. And that's going to be something that pops up a lot more throughout the Big Ten season, I imagine, especially as they play teams like Iowa in a few days, which loves to play fast, right? Loves to get going out of the gate and throw themselves at an opponent until obviously there's a big lead and then the game feels effectively over. So that's going to be something that comes up for Indiana more than just in this game against Maryland. Maryland a 14-4 advantage in fast break points. That's something that's been true for Maryland throughout the season, that they've had great advantages in that category. I look at the Minnesota game. It's a big part of how they were able to win in double overtime. So yeah, oppressive press defense all game long from Maryland applied to Indiana. Also, Maryland's a 13-7 advantage in offensive rebounds. They won the possession battle convincingly. Indiana hasn't won the possession battle in a big game in a very long time this season. Chesky was limited. She had 17 points, but again, she had to work for those 17 points way harder. It took way longer for her to sort of get going and get in rhythm because of how good Maryland was at defending her. And so Maryland pulls away in the third quarter. Effectively, the entire fourth quarter is garbage time, and Maryland wins. And that's a story that we've seen time and time again this season. It can be applied to the Minnesota game. It can be applied to the Michigan State game. But again, I was a little bit encouraged by this result. Maya McAleskey's hot and cold. She's a freshman, so I don't blame any, like, if she ever struggles in any game on the road against a top 7 opponent, I'm obviously not going to be upset about that. Indiana starting multiple freshmen. They have a very young team. Lene Beaumont missed all of last season, right? She's playing great. Shea Chesky's obviously a senior, kind of the centerpiece. They've had injuries. They've had roster volatility. This is, again, a young team. This is a building year for Indiana, as we kind of outlined in the last episode. So any shortcomings, any losses aren't really going to anger or frustrate me throughout the season, now that I understand sort of what this team is and what the approach to the season and what the realistic expectations for the season need to be. And again, encouraged. Maya McAleskey, 20 points, leading scorer. She can do that as a freshman on Indiana against a top 7 opponent. That's really cool and super encouraging, especially considering the thought that McAleskey could be around for another 3 more years after this one. Indiana was capable of competing. Again, if you just look at the first half, they were close with a top 7 opponent when their best player was very well defended. Right? They also kind of looked better in terms of working through the press. Indiana had multiple situations where they were scoring quick buckets early in the shot clock because they simply had numbers in the half court, because they were able to break the press with ease. And now the Maryland defenders are behind Indiana, behind the ball, really, which is obviously an issue defensively. And Indiana was able to score a few times off of that in a manner that I found very impressive, and certainly an improvement from where they were in the Marshall game and where they were in the UIC game earlier in the season. So I was impressed in a lot of ways by what I saw from Indiana. I thought I was encouraged, I think is the right word. I saw lots of improvements. Zania Sokenguman helped out on the glass a great deal, 3 rebounds in her limited minutes. That was significant. She's only going to get better as she gets more accustomed to playing basketball again and sort of moving the body in kind of a high-intensity fashion again. And so Sokenguman coming back is a big deal. McAleskey scoring 20 is a big deal. Indiana working through the press, and again, 20 turnovers, 21 turnovers, still very bad, but that's kind of what's expected against Maryland, and that is still a weakness of Indiana's. And again, improvement is what I'm seeing, and that's what's important. We're not expecting a Big Ten championship. We're not expecting a national championship. We're not expecting an NCAA tournament berth this season. We know Terry Morin's capable of all of those things, but we are probably not going to see it this season just because of the circumstance of, again, the roster volatility, the injuries, the youth. This is a new, young core. And this program is building that young core into one that can do all of those things we just listed: Big Ten championship, national championship, NCAA tournament berth, and second weekend runs, that kind of thing. This is a core that I believe is going to be capable of that one day, just not yet. But this is a great example of the fact that this team is constantly growing and constantly improving and constantly becoming better. And it's only a matter of time until this team pops a big win against a major opponent in the Big Ten and really plays spoiler in some ways. Maybe it's this weekend at home against Iowa. I believe I'll be in attendance for that one on Sunday. Maybe it's even the Washington win would be huge if they were to beat Washington next week. I believe that game's on Tuesday or Wednesday. There are teams throughout the season that Indiana is going to come across that are really, really good. And especially when they get them inside Assembly Hall, I think there's no telling what could possibly occur, especially as Sokenguman sort of ingratiates herself back into the roster. So there's optimism in the supporting cast with McAleskey. There's optimism offensively across the board. There's optimism in the front court with Sokenguman returning, Noyan continuing to look good, Onjeneme continuing to sort of establish her presence on the roster as a contributor and a key rotating piece in the lineups for this team. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see where things go. Obviously a tough loss, but one that had me encouraged. It wasn't a wire-to-wire 4-quarter disaster where Maryland was just way better for 4 quarters. Indiana really applied some resistance, and they put up a fight on the road against their former best player and the number 7 team in the country. And I'm into that. I'm on board with Indiana women's basketball, as I have been all season, of course, but I'm on board for them moving into the future because I feel like I'm seeing true improvement and true growth from this team that encourages me and, again, makes me excited about the next game. So I'll be watching. And they take on Nebraska tomorrow night. Maybe they win, maybe they don't. I believe that game's on the road. I'll probably be there in person when they play Iowa, if the schedules line up. And there's lots to be excited about. And again, it's only a matter of time before the wins start to be added to the win column, especially as competition lightens up a little bit. You play Minnesota, who's probably going to be ranked pretty soon. You play Michigan State, who was ranked. You play Maryland, who was in the top 10. Even Illinois earlier in the season is clearly now, in retrospect, really, really good. So Indiana women's basketball, they're in a good place. They're improving. Again, I'm encouraged, and I see growth, and that honestly is what matters most this season for this program. All right, I want to talk about another basketball team, one that is also struggling a great deal, and that's the Indiana Pacers. They're at a crossroads with the center position. I put out an article for the Hoosier Network a few days ago, which basically has the exact same headline. The Pacers are at a crossroad with the center position. You're welcome to look that up. I would appreciate it if you read it. Either way, I kind of want to bring up all of those points again on this show because I'm really proud of it and I think it's super interesting. And also there was a lineup change the other day that kind of indicated that there is an answer to the question I posed at the end of that article. The context of the Indiana Pacers center position is one that's known by obviously all Pacer fans and plenty of just NBA fans and basketball fans across the board. Miles Turner leaves. He goes to the Milwaukee Bucks in the offseason. Thomas Bryant, oh, by the way, also leaves. He ends up with the Cleveland Cavaliers in the offseason. And the Pacers are left with no clear starting center and a lot of options, internal options that are unproven, right? You look at Isaiah Jackson, who's had injury issues. You look at Tony Bradley, who contributed to the NBA Finals series and, contributed to the playoff run, certainly, but maybe not someone you necessarily are relying on to, put up a great deal of production as a starter for the team. Tony Bradley, by the way, a few days ago was waived by the Indiana Pacers, which was kind of crazy and alarming to me. It was weird to see, we've seen Pacers players waived throughout the season, but it was weird to see one that was on the finals team that was legitimately producing and on the floor in the NBA Finals against the Thunder. It was weird to see that player just waived in the middle of the season. But it's the way it goes. Micah Potter's been playing really well, so I'm not completely surprised. And that's kind of where we bring in the next points about this, right? Jay Huff comes in from Memphis in the offseason. Micah Potter was signed by the Pacers maybe a week or two ago. I'm sure he's on a full season contract by now. I don't actually know, but obviously it was a 10-day hardship contract, and now he's really proven his worth on this roster and is probably going to stay on this roster for the rest of the season, if I had to guess. And so the initial issue, right, before all the Potter stuff, when it's just Jay Huff pretty much and Isaiah Jackson started against the Thunder in the very first game of the season. You look at Jay Huff, who last season was averaging a block a game off the bench, and he was shooting 40% from three. Now that's a smaller sample size because obviously Huff kind of stole Isaiah Jackson's starting center spot, and so Huff has been a starter for the majority of this season for the Pacers, shooting more threes, certainly shooting at a higher volume per game than he was before. But he was 40% from three last year, and he was averaging about a block a game off the bench. So when you look at that, you look at that stat, and obviously they were looking at film, and they were looking way more deeply than I did, just looking at the numbers. But the numbers kind of justify the idea that you lose Miles Turner, who was kind of just a 3-and-D guy, right? A great rim protector, lots of blocks, also shoots the three ball well. That's kind of the archetype of center that Miles Turner was and is, I suppose, in Milwaukee, at least trying to be. And Jay Huff kind of fills that role, right? In theory, based on the statistics from last season, averaging a block a game off the bench and shooting 40% from three. So you have rim protection, right, in theory. And so then you translate that over to this season, and this season that rim protection has been translated from Memphis to Indiana, which is great, right? He, I believe, leads he's top 3 or something in the NBA in blocks. That was as of a few days ago. I think he was second in the league in blocks per game. But he's shooting 29% from three. And he shot well last night, but he was in a major slump at the time that I wrote that article, at the time that I sort of put together this piece. And still, his shooting percentage, obviously, markedly worse than it was in Memphis last season. And that brings about kind of an issue, because you look at someone like Jay Huff, who, again, plays very well, great player. I really like him. He's honestly maybe my favorite player on the Pacers. Potter's kind of stealing that spot. Obviously, I like the guys like Nesmith and Nembhard and Halliburton more, but kind of the new guys, I like Jay Huff a great deal. Great rim protector again, but not shooting great. And so that puts him in the situation where Indiana last year and is trying to be this year the team that obviously runs the floor. They play with quick pace. They're great in transition. Pick and pop threes around the perimeter are a big deal for Indiana. And to have a center that can stretch the floor and do that is a big deal. And Jay Huff kind of doesn't fit that mold so far this season, clearly. And again, shooting 29% from three. Not very good. Also, what that means is when he's jacking threes like that and missing them, he's not there for the rebounds more often than not because he was the one shooting. He's at the top of the key while the ball's underneath the basket. And a 7-1 pacer, and in most games, the tallest and biggest player on the floor is not available to rebound. So it's kind of just wasting possessions, right? And there's other things about Jay Huff. There's some defensive liability things, but it's really when he's out of position, and it's not really his fault. I don't really blame him. But fundamentally, wasting possessions effectively by not getting the rebounds and just, shooting threes at such a high volume and not making them is the issue with Jay Huff. So Micah Potter comes in, right? Signed James Wiseman a couple times, couple other centers. I really liked Jeremiah Robinson Earl when he was here, but obviously he didn't stick around for very long. And so you have these centers, you're trying to kind of fill out the rest of the roster at the center position. And then a few weeks ago, they bring in Micah Potter. And so far in his first 5 games, and again, he's played more since this article was published, but at the time, 40% from three, pretty close to Huff in rebounding. Huff had 3.8 rebounds per game. Potter had 3.4 at that time. Potter, sometimes a defensive liability, a little bit smaller, a little bit of a smaller frame than Huff, right? So underneath the basket, if there's players that are huge that can dunk, they're probably dunking on Micah Potter. That was kind of my read through the first few games or so. So sometimes a little bit more weakness defensively between the blocks. But he had the three-point shooting. The rebounding is there, right? Rim protection, not so much. And now you have this question of, are you going to sacrifice defense a little bit with Potter and kind of adapt to and sort of appeal to is the word, my apologies, appeal to the Indiana Pacers of last season where it's a lot of running. Micah Potter, obviously not afraid to run the floor. It's kind of just a race to 140 points where Indiana's looking to score a great deal. Potter can score from around the perimeter. He can grab rebounds. He can score from underneath the basket. But maybe sometimes he's going to be scored on underneath the basket. But Indiana might be okay with that if they like Potter, and it seems like they do, as we're going to get to. And so that's sort of what you would gain and lose with Potter, whereas with Huff, you're playing a little bit more of a traditional basketball at the center position. You're playing a little bit more traditionally with him, down low, between the blocks. He's looking to grab rebounds. He's looking to defend the rim. He probably can't shoot the three as well. And when Huff is on the floor, there probably has to be an understanding that if he can't shoot the three as well, we're going to have to adjust the way we approach offense, which is an interesting perspective because we know that Huff can shoot the three, right? He's capable of shooting 40% from three, even to Potter. And so we know it's there. It's just not showing itself right now. And so just continuously allowing Huff to take those shots, and he's continuously missing them. And it's super unfortunate because we know he's capable. It's just not happening right now. And as a result, possessions are wasted. It's easier for opponents to go on runs. And obviously that contributes to Indiana losing games. So it's kind of this you're weighing two options of Potter or Huff, or maybe neither of them, and just will look elsewhere if you're the Indiana Pacers. And that's the dilemma that the Pacers seem to be in right now. Is there going to be an identity shift towards Huff, appealing to Huff's play style a little bit and kind of appreciating the idea that he's a more traditional center, at least he has been this season? Or are you looking at Potter, who kind of has a more surefire shooting form? He's more likely to hit those threes. He is more consistent from the three-point line for sure. You sacrifice defense a little bit, but he's still rebounding as a center should. Or you have Huff, who, again, a little bit more traditional. And so is there going to be an identity shift towards the Pacers of last season or the Pacers now with Jay Huff? Or maybe neither, and we look elsewhere and we see what can happen in free agency. And it's super interesting because you have to balance the priorities of 2026 and 2027 because the season's over in 2026, right? The team's 6-30, 6-31, I believe, after last night. So not making the playoffs, right? Definitely in play for a very high lottery pick. The season's over. But 2027 could, in theory, be an NBA Finals run and maybe an NBA championship run for this team. And, that's very much in play, and that's ultimately the goal, the near future, long-term future, however you want to describe it. The goal is to win a championship in 2027. And so what's going to help Indiana do that the best? Once Tyrese Halliburton comes back, and there's obviously a draft and all of those things, maybe a center's drafted and we go there. I haven't looked at any mock drafts, but lots of options for the Pacers. But the other night, they started Micah Potter in place of Jay Huff. Potter had the starting position instead of Jay Huff, which kind of, again, at the end of that article, I kind of posed the question of, is there going to be an identity shift? Which way are the Pacers going to go on this? The more traditional route and the route of trusting that Jay Huff's going to get back to his high shooting numbers, or the route of, Micah Potter has a little bit of a different skill set. There's pitfalls in different areas, but there is more consistent three-point shooting and there is more consistent offensive production, and that's kind of what Indiana needs the most right now. It's an interesting question, and it seems like they're leaning towards Potter based on the fact that he started the other night, and Huff shot well off the bench. I think 4 for 6 from 3. That was at least the case at some point, but Huff shot well, Potter started. It's super interesting, and that's kind of my favorite positional dilemma that the Pacers are in right now. Players are off the floor, there's injuries here, there's injuries there, but Huff and Potter are both healthy, and the team's losing. But at the very least, when either one of those centers is on the floor, I am absolutely locked in to just see how they do, what's better, what's worse, what's different with both of them on the floor, or each of them on the floor in various situations. And again, I'm interested to see what this team looks like in 2027, because maybe they found their starter in Potter and Huff can come off the bench. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe only one of them's on the team next season. Maybe there's someone in the drafts. Maybe there's someone at the trade deadline. Maybe there's someone in free agency in the offseason. Maybe there's a plan at the beginning of 2027, right? And then obviously the draft comes around and plans change a little bit. That's what I'm excited about, and that's what I'm interested in. And again, it's just kind of which approach do you prefer between Huff and Potter? Because they're both very good. They're both very proven. They both have some great qualities, and they both have some pretty noticeable and alarming and glaring weaknesses, and kind of selecting which one of those weaknesses to take on is what's fascinating to me with the Pacers right now. And that's kind of my excuse to watch Pacers games still. They're losing, everything's bad, but if you just don't worry about the rest of the game and just focus on the centers, it's kind of really entertaining. And that's what I've learned over the course of the last 2 weeks or so since Potter has been signed here. Obviously, I'm mostly joking. I obviously still like watching Pacers games, and even though the team's losing, it's still a good time, and I still love watching Siakam and Nembhard and all of those guys. But you get the point. The center position's super fascinating with the Pacers right now, and I'm really interested to see where it goes. All right, let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts. The collapse was obviously very, very sad, but Ballard and Steichen are returning, and so now we have an interesting situation where there's a lot of outraged Colts fans. There's a lot of, in theory, rational members of the Colts organization and front office. It was kind of anticipated that after missing the playoffs again, maybe you see at least Ballard and then maybe Steichen lose their jobs, but neither of them did. And I don't really have an opinion on that. I don't like this conversation. As a Colts fan, I don't like this time of year. I never enjoy, and I never do it really. I don't call for people's jobs. I don't really understand the appeal of, standing on a box on the street and yelling that someone needs to be fired. You look at that. I don't know if Steichen is married, but I know Ballard, has kids. His son was at one point the quarterback of the rival high school of my high school, played us in the sectional playoffs, beat my team, beat my school. But the point is, real people, real wives, real children, real families. I don't, real Christmases, real Thanksgivings. I don't think about a person and hate them enough to say that they deserve to not be employed anymore, especially because Ballard and Steichen put together a real fun first half of this season, right? And we were on cloud 9 at 8-2, at 7-1. The Falcons game was awesome, right? A little bit nerve-wracking, a close game, nearly a bad loss. They come through in Berlin, and that's when it was cemented to me that, this team could probably really, for real, win the AFC and maybe win a Super Bowl. And the fact that we could have the thought of this team might be winning the Super Bowl, halfway through a season, 10 games into a season, we were saying that the Colts could win a Super Bowl. And now we're saying that, we have our pitchforks and we have our torches and we're burning houses down. And we're saying that, everyone needs to be fired. Let's exile these people from Indianapolis because of how the season ended. When there were all the injuries involved, and obviously I understand that Ballard and Steichen are to some degree at fault for this, but I'm not enraged enough to say that they should not be employed in Indianapolis anymore, at least with the Indianapolis Colts. The collapse was super sad, right? The Super Bowl was in reach. I remember talking with friends. Like, I remember when Sauce got traded here, and I remember just that moment and the grandeur of it. And I remember the legitimate excitement that I hadn't felt since the Pacers. Well, I guess Indiana football really brought that out in me in the Illinois game. But besides Indiana football, and from a professional sports perspective, right? The Pacers run obviously brought out the feeling of this team could really win a championship. And when we got Sauce, it felt like we could really win a championship and that this whole Super Bowl run was real. And I hold on to that feeling. I am focusing on that feeling rather than the feeling of complete collapse and disappointment at the end of the season. And again, I understand, like, in theory, Chris Ballard didn't put together a good enough roster. In theory, Shane Steichen, I know there's play calling stuff. I know there's game management stuff with Steichen. But we were really for real saying when the Colts were the 1 seed that they could win a Super Bowl. And now they're out of the playoffs, and that's really unfortunate. But again, you lose your starting quarterback. You lose both of your starting outside corners. You lost to Forrest Buckner for a great deal of time in the middle of the season there. There were a lot of injury situations going on. You bring in Phillip Rivers. He's your quarterback, right, which was awesome and fun and interesting, but obviously not ideal for a team that's trying to go win a Super Bowl and even just make the playoffs. And yeah, the collapse was horrible. I was at the 49ers game. It was very sad. I had a great time, but very sad. The Jaguars game, very sad. And again, the discourse on this season would be completely different if we didn't have so many injuries. And I know that coaching has something to do with injuries, and I know roster construction obviously has a lot to do with depth, but this is a totally different situation and a totally different conversation. And really the thing for me is there's a lot of frustration because we kind of mortgaged our future for this season in getting Sauce, right? We don't have first-round picks for the next 2 seasons. We are really gouged of picks for the next few years. So the future of the Colts is not super bright long-term from a draft perspective. But to me, I look around and I say, we're probably going to keep the majority of this team, right? In theory, Daniel Jones, and I don't know if Daniel Jones is even going to be healthy enough to play next year. But in theory, if Daniel Jones returns, we have our quarterback back. I imagine we're going to pay Alec Pierce, right? Jonathan Taylor, Quentin Nelson, like all these pieces are returning. Maybe nothing with Travis Ward Sr., who might be retiring. He said he's probably definitely going to retire if he gets another concussion. He's got to think about his future. He's got to think about his family, right? His children, and just the future of his life after football. So maybe we see Ward Sr. retire at some point in the offseason or during next season. But for the most part, this team and its core is returning. And I would honestly, genuinely look into the camera right now and tell you that, yeah, I think this roster is capable of winning a Super Bowl. It's not to say that I think this roster is the best in the NFL. But again, think about where we were when this team was healthy, or mostly healthy at 8-2. Oh, by the way, again, you have the injuries in the middle of the season, and you forget that, like, in the preseason, we were losing major depth pieces at safety and corner. Wally out for the season. Hunter Wohler, the safety from Wisconsin, who I love, out for the season, right? And there's more that I'm forgetting at the moment just because there's so many. But again, those safeties and those corners, those depth pieces, those guys that would have been stepping up, by the way, played well in the preseason, played well in training camp, would have been stepping up and playing exceptionally well during the season in the absence of Gardner and Ward and guys like that. And they were also injured at the beginning of the season. And again, that obviously has something to do with coaching and, stress on the body, that sort of thing. But a lot of that's pretty avoidable or not avoidable. A lot of that's pretty random and spontaneous and unavoidable in a sense where in a parallel universe, this team has the depth at safety and corner to sustain an entire season, even with injuries. And, obviously losing the starters is a big deal as well. But for real, at 8-2 and at 7-1 early in this season, this team was 100% capable of winning a Super Bowl. And I know that because that they were playing well enough to be that way. They beat the number 1 seed in the AFC. They were, after all the injuries, very close on the road with the number 1 team in the NFC. Multiple playoff teams they have wins against, right? This is all looking at the Chargers. This is all, of course, pre-injuries, pre-sort of collapse. The Colts had wins over multiple playoff teams in the AFC and in the NFC. They were the very top of the AFC at that time. The roster looked great. The offense was amazing. There was no ramp-up period. They just scored 30-plus against Miami right away, and obviously I understand that Miami in retrospect, was very bad in the first half of the season, but No ramp-up period for this offense. The defense was looking great right away. And when healthy, this Colts team is capable of winning the Super Bowl. And you got to remember, we're playing a sport with a weird-shaped football that bounces in unpredictable directions, and it has weird rules, and you can kick it, and it's 3 points. And we're playing a really random, wild sport right here. And so that means that there's a lot of teams, especially in the NFL with the way it's structured and the parity, a lot of teams that can win the Super Bowl. And we're going to see that pan out over the course of the playoffs when maybe a team like the Texans goes and wins it. And I legitimately think that 5 teams in the AFC playoffs are capable of winning the Super Bowl. I don't believe in the Chargers because I don't think you can just completely not have pass protection and win a championship. I don't believe in the Steelers. Obviously, they won their division. Great for them. But, 9-8, I don't think the Steelers are going to win a Super Bowl. But the Broncos can win it. The Patriots can win it. In my opinion, the Jaguars and the Texans, based on what I've seen from them in the last 3 weeks, they can both win it. The Bills obviously can win it. This is a group of teams, 5 of them, that I think could totally win the Super Bowl, just in the AFC. And the NFC, the Rams could totally win it. The Seahawks could win it. The 49ers, frankly, could win it. Plenty of teams over there. I honestly don't have the NFC playoffs memorized. The Packers are a little bit injured, but the Bears look great, right? So lots of teams over there that can win the Super Bowl. The Eagles as well. Maybe 5 in each conference, 10 teams that can win the Super Bowl. The Colts totally, if healthy, would have been in that group. And again, they beat those teams when healthy, many of them, throughout the season in those situations. I know they had an easy schedule early on, but 8-2 with some big wins over teams that are now clearly Super Bowl contenders. So that roster, if it returns with Steichen was the one that kind of engineered the situation where they looked that good in the first place. I totally believe in this team to go to the playoffs, do great things in the playoffs, maybe win a Super Bowl. Just because you don't win a Super Bowl doesn't mean you were incapable of winning a Super Bowl. And that, I think, is true across the board. You look at the Bengals, right? They had a team that could win the Super Bowl. They went to it. They nearly won it. They didn't, and they haven't been back since. And that doesn't mean the Joe Burrow era is a failure, right? It just means they didn't obviously capitalize on the moment when they got to the moment, but they were capable of getting to that moment, and that's all you can ask for in the NFL, is to be one of those teams at the very end that's capable of winning a Super Bowl and winning those big games and being in those big games. And again, we're playing a really dumb sport that has a lot of crazy stuff happening in it all the time. Weird shaped ball. We start the game by kicking it, a million yards down the field and running at each other. It's a weird sport. And so late in the season, obviously weird things happen. And unfortunately, some very unfortunate things for the Colts happened. But there's totally a world next season where we just run it back and there's an indication that maybe this team could go far. It'd be different if this team finished 8-9 and, won one week, lost the next week, just won every other game, never looked exceptional, lost to every good team, beat every team below us, 8-9, mediocre, truly mediocre. And it's another thing if what actually happened this season happens where, the Colts were 8-2, legitimately looked like a Super Bowl contender, had the season kind of derailed, in part by injuries, in part by a slightly more difficult schedule, all sorts of, key positions, losing your interior run defense with DeForest Buckner, losing your outside corners, and then playing teams with really good pass defenses, losing your quarterback, right? And I know that, again, there's a depth aspect to that from a roster construction perspective. But truly, Indianapolis, this was not a mediocre season, right? This was a really great start and a really bad finish. And at the very least, that's something that we haven't seen recently. Usually we see truly mediocre seasons, injuries or not, just 8-9, 9-8, you're just trudging forward to constantly throughout the entire season, knowing that the ceiling is maybe one playoff win. Here, the ceiling felt like a Super Bowl, and that's something new. And this is going to be an organization that learns from this experience. There's going to be more to kind of build upon for next year. And so for the people that are outraged about Ballard and Steichen returning, I respectfully disagree with you. Also, Carly Ursay-Gordon is someone I have complete and total faith in. The two human beings on earth right now that I have complete trust in are number 1, Curt Cignetti. I'm sure there's more, but my top 2. Number 1, Curt Cignetti. Number 2, Carly Ursay-Gordon. Number 3, Steve Aird. Maybe Steve Aird's number 2. I don't know. We'll talk about him in a couple minutes, but I have faith that Carly Ursay-Gordon knows what she's talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm sitting here in my bedroom with a microphone. Carly Ursay-Gordon is in coaches' meetings, in players' meetings, on the sideline, as close to Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard as she could possibly be. She clearly takes her job very seriously. I trust her. She's been around football and been around the Colts organization for her entire life, right? I trust Carly Ursay-Gordon. I know the results haven't necessarily shown themselves, but again, the ceiling feeling like it being the Super Bowl, or at least the AFC Championship, or at least a run at the Super Bowl, that feeling like the ceiling for the Colts is like completely new and completely awesome. And it was a taste of success. And I don't see it as a tease and then a collapse back into normal mediocrity. I see it as a flash of what could be, and I'll invest in it. I'll trust in it, right? I'll, put my emotional energy into it again and see if Ballard and Steichen and Ursay Gordon can turn this into something great next season. And I have confidence. It's a great roster. It's a playoff caliber roster. It's, in my opinion, a Super Bowl caliber roster. Maybe that's a little bit too high. Again, all you can ask for is for your team to have their ceiling be winning a Super Bowl. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have 6 to 10 teams that their ceiling is winning a Super Bowl. One of them is going to win it, right? And they're going to play some awesome playoff games, and it's going to be super fun in January. Dumb, ridiculous stuff is going to happen, and teams are going to get upset for reasons that you never would have anticipated, right? And someone's going to miss a field goal from the 12-yard line, right? Like, this is football. So if your ceiling is winning a Super Bowl, that's all you can ask for. And I say run back that team as many times as possible with adjustments and improvements. Certainly don't fire anybody as you're trying to, in that Super Bowl window, finally actually win one. We don't know if this team is going to actually be able to get over the hump and capitalize on their Super Bowl window, but we know that this group, Steichen and Ballard and Ursay Gordon and probably Daniel Jones, we know that this group is capable of creating a Super Bowl window, which is something brand new for Colts fans. And so I'm into it. I'm ready to go. I've watched the entire season. I watched very closely all 17 games. I wrote a game recap for the Hoosier Network on all 17 games. I feel pretty in tune with the Colts organization, and I'm ready to run it back. I feel positive about this. I haven't every single season we've decided to run it back, but this year I feel good because, again, we've established, I don't know if a Super Bowl window is open, but we've established that a Super Bowl window can be opened by this group, this front office, this coaching staff, etc. And so I'm ready to go. I'm ready to charge ahead into next season and see if that Super Bowl window is created and maybe if that Super Bowl window is capitalized on in that time. That's all I have to say about that. I'm just fundamentally not someone that enjoys and partakes in, calling for people's jobs, saying that people need to be fired. But even just fundamentally, I am willing to invest in Ursay Gordon. After what I saw this season and the circumstances that this team was in, I'm willing to invest in 2027, or I guess 2026 it would be, this next season. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to invest in it, and I'm excited to see what's next for the Indianapolis Colts. All right, let's talk about Indiana football. A couple quick segments to end the show here. We're at about 42 minutes right now, so definitely moving along. And probably going to get to an hour, which feels very good. When I prepare these shows, I like to start with 5 bullet points. I have like 5 topics. I usually don't go more than that just because I don't want to overload myself. I'll also, obviously trying to fit it into a certain window of the calendar. Don't want to burn out by like expecting myself to talk about 12 things in a given show. And so we got to a good 5, a solid 5 that I felt really good about. The Pacers, the Colts, IU women's basketball, IU football, and IU volleyball. And so it feels good to know that 5 topic kind of idea can consistently probably get to about an hour or, a little bit under an hour. It's a good place to be, I feel like, for this podcast. So I'm excited to move forward in that context. IU football won the Rose Bowl. This is old news. Everyone knows. Everyone watched. Everyone's talked about it, heard a million podcasts about it. So I'm not going to talk too much about this right now just because what I'm about to say is not like new or crazy or interesting, especially, a week after the game happens, almost a week after the game happens at this point. But what we knew going into the game was that Alabama couldn't run the ball, right? And that there is no blueprint to beating Indiana. That's my biggest thing with Indiana because I won't call myself an IU doubter. Well, first of all, I grew up in a Purdue household, right? I grew up a Purdue fan, so I don't have the, long-term IU bandwagonism, or that's the wrong word, but I don't have the long-term IU fanaticism to where, I have this with other teams where, the second I see something good about the Colts, I'm all in on the Colts. This team's going to win a championship. It was the same way with the Pacers. That makes the losses a whole lot more heartbreaking and a whole lot more crushing. But I really get on board with my teams. I have real bias for my teams. I don't have that in the same way with IU, just because I wasn't 6 years old, crying at an IU basketball loss. I wasn't, an IU fan when in the Michael Penix Jr. year, right, in the COVID year with that Ohio State loss. Like I wasn't attached to the team at that time. So I don't have that childhood, like, complete attachment to a team that associate with IU, but obviously I've been covering them for, maybe 4 months, not a whole lot of time. Been a student here for about 4 months. love IU and I'm all in on IU, but I'm not someone that just automatically assumes the best in the teams. And so I haven't been an IU doubter, but I was someone that said, IU at Oregon and IU at Penn State this year, probably pretty much auto losses. Went back on that as soon as I started watching Fernando Mendoza highlights at Cal, frankly, but it felt like it was going to be a 10-2 year. Maybe we make the playoffs. Maybe we miss it. I didn't think the SEC was going to implode in quite in the same way. If you have 10-2 Vanderbilt versus 10-2 IU, I don't know who gets in. That'd be an interesting conversation within the context of IU potentially losing at Oregon, at Penn State. The Illinois game looked like a much bigger deal coming into the season. The Iowa game is obviously very difficult. That one very well could have been a loss this season, and certainly in kind of what my expectations for IU were for this season, that Iowa game could have been described as a loss as well. But over the course of the season, I've kind of been bitten a few times. I thought maybe we'd lose at Oregon in the middle of that Penn State game, as many did. I really did think we were going to lose. I really did think we were going to lose to Iowa after that interception. Same with Oregon. There were moments throughout the season where I doubted. And there were moments during the season where I was like, yeah, maybe we don't get this one. Like the Big Ten Championship game against Ohio State. And then after the Big Ten Championship game, I kind of had this realization that in 2025, we understand how to beat Ohio State. Teams understand how to beat Ohio State after Indiana did it, right? To some degree, you can kind of copycat the approach that Indiana took to beating Ohio State. Obviously, every team is different strengths and weaknesses. Indiana has a whole lot more strengths than a lot of other teams in the country. But it was clear that there's a way to beat these teams. And right now we have no proof that IU can lose. Penn State almost did it, but it took their very best football at home against an Indiana team that obviously faltered a few times, and it took a heroic effort at the end for Mendoza and Omar Cooper Jr., but they did that. They won the game. So there's no blueprint to beat Indiana. And there's no explanation of this is what if you just do these things, you can beat IU. For all we know, IU is unbeatable this season. I don't think so, because obviously there's more parity in college football than that, and obviously it's not the same game as it was 10 years ago. But nonetheless, for all we know, Indiana's just going to win these last two games 38-3, just as they beat Alabama, and they're going to win the national championship, and that's all there is to it. We'll have to see, but there was no blueprint to beating Indiana. So Alabama was going to have to put together an amazing, amazing effort, particularly at the quarterback position on offense, because it was understood that Alabama couldn't run the ball. Oh, by the way, Indiana has a great run defense, so the run game was going to be out of the equation for Alabama. And it was, I think, something like 29 rushing yards. I'd have to go back and look at the actual statistics, but alarmingly low rushing yards for Alabama. That's sack adjusted and non-sack adjusted. It's shocking. And also, Alabama didn't really have great quarterback play, right? Indiana's offense was undeniable. They were inevitable. They were working up and down the field. They scored 38. Alabama's front seven had some good moments. They sacked Mendoza a couple times, right? Good moments, good pressure from Alabama up front. But still, the Indiana offense, run game, pass game, balanced offensive attack, traversing the field with ease and scoring 38 with ease. And Alabama was not even close, obviously, to matching that. We knew they couldn't run the ball, but their quarterback play was also inadequate. There was injury stuff here too, but Ty Simpson didn't play particularly well. They took him out, and then obviously Mack comes in, plays pretty well, puts together the first scoring drive that looked like it was going to be a touchdown drive. Obviously, they ended up settling for a field goal in that situation. But two quarterbacks, neither one of them play amazingly well. There's no run game. There's no offense for Alabama. And the Indiana offense, again, just kept doing what it's done literally in every single game this season, maybe besides the Iowa game, maybe besides the Ohio State game, but still doing enough to win when paired with that defense. And yeah, Indiana rolls to a victory. That's all there is to it. Alabama was going to need heroicism. They were going to need much more resistant defense, and they were going to need something that would be put in mythology books from Ty Simpson and from this Alabama offense and Ryan Williams and everyone involved. And that totally could have happened. There's a parallel universe where that happened and Alabama won, but it wasn't this universe. Now their quarterback played well, in part because of the Indiana defense and in part because just the quarterbacks didn't play well. Alabama had nothing offensively. They weren't resistant enough defensively, and the game's over. Indiana rolls to a victory. And this reminded me a great deal of those Alabamas of years past where, you sit down with the family, you gather around, it's a Monday night, it's the College Football Playoff National Championship, it's Alabama versus Ohio State, right? Big brands, two blue blood programs, mixed up those two terms right there, but a big game, right? Alabama, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Alabama, whoever. and Alabama just destroys them and completely dismantles them. And that's a team that then you later find out had 20 NFL players on the starting 22 roster, and they just completely roll. And that's what it felt like in this Indiana game. Indiana, Alabama, most watched college football playoff game in the 12-team format history, I think. Huge game, Indiana, Alabama in the quarterfinals in the Rose Bowl. And Indiana just dismantles them and rolls to a victory. And in years past, again, there's always been a team where we're like, okay, Alabama destroyed Oklahoma, Alabama destroyed Notre Dame, but what happens when they see Justin Fields, right? Or what happens when they see Trevor Lawrence? And it's just not a problem at all for those past Alabama teams, and that might be the case for IU, especially considering, again, the teams left. You've got the 5 seed, 6 seed, and 7 seed, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, excuse me, no, that'd be the 10 seed in Miami. 10 seed, 6 seed, 5 seed. I probably have those wrong, but Oregon the 5, Ole Miss the 6, Miami the 10. That's correct. So those 3 seeds, not super scary. Indiana beat Oregon already. Miami barely got in the playoff. Ole Miss lost their head coach. And that's not to diminish those teams. They're all great and awesome and fully capable of beating IU, as far as we know. But again, maybe IU just rolls the rest of the way. And this is that somehow in the new era of the transfer portal and NIL and all those things, this is just a team that completely dismantles and dominates everyone else, especially at the end of the year. I'm excited to see. And Indiana's really balling out in the transfer portal right now, despite preparing for a college football playoff semifinal game. They're balling out in recruiting. They got their quarterback for next year, Josh Hoover from TCU. This is an empire that has been constructed. And it seems all signs are pointing to the idea that they're just going to completely roll to a championship. I say that, maybe they lose in the Peach Bowl, but they look impenetrable right now. And they look insurmountable right now. And I was watching this game. So I was in studio for WIUX. So I was primarily listening to the game. I'm preparing my halftime show and my post-game show, things of that nature. I realized I had ESPN up, and it was about a play and a half behind. So I was mostly just watching it for replays and to kind of gain additional context. And there was a moment late in the game where it was over and we knew what was going to happen. And all I was waiting to do for my post-game show was just, put in the stats once they're official at the end of the game. And so I'm kind of just listening to the broadcast, smiling, enjoying myself. I'm watching ESPN, and they put the camera on Curt Cignetti, and I'm watching him and his facial expressions for 10 seconds. They kept the camera on him for a while as they were kneeling out the clock at the end, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Indiana's literally never going to lose a game ever again. Like that, the thought came to my head of Curt Cignetti will literally never lose again. He did his losing last year twice against the 2 teams in the national championship game, and now he has the recruiting class, he has the recruiting class, he has the transfer portal class, he has the quarterback, he has the money, he has the pedigree, he has all those things. He's literally never going to lose again. Maybe that's true. Maybe Curt Cignetti just never loses another game ever again in his coaching career at IU. But watching that game, that's how it felt. And so that gives me the inkling that Indiana's probably going to go win the national championship this year, because I'm sure I wasn't the only person that felt that way. And again, weird game, weirdly shaped football, weird rules, college football players, all young. This could go any number of ways the rest of the way. Maybe we lose the Peach Bowl. But this IU team certainly looked like they are not going to lose again this season after that drubbing of Alabama 38-3. So looking ahead to the Peach Bowl, it's a rematch. It's hard to beat a team twice. It's hard to beat a really good team twice. It has a great coach and a great quarterback. But again, you just can't. I can never again pick against Indiana. Ever again. I won't pick against them, because just looking at Curt Cignetti, I'll remember that moment probably forever. In the studios of WIUX at the media school at Indiana University, I'm sitting there, I'm watching ESPN, I'm looking at Curt Cignetti's face, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, at 38-3, this man is never going to lose ever again. We'll see if that ends up being the case. And it seems like, again, they're heavily favored to win the national championship, especially because a lot of the other top seeds are out of the tournament. So we'll see how the rest of the playoff goes the rest of the way. It's going to be difficult to beat Oregon again, but it's the Peach Bowl. Indiana traveled very well to Pasadena. I imagine they'll travel even better to Atlanta, A, because it's a semifinal game, and B, because Atlanta's a whole lot closer than Pasadena. And we'll see what happens with Indiana and Oregon. We're going to have another podcast either tomorrow or the day after, but the point being, we're going to have another podcast before the Peach Bowl, so we'll have much to discuss about the Peach Bowl. Might put together a little Peach Bowl preview just for fun, just because I think it would be interesting. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the rest of this playoff. And again, Indiana won the Rose Bowl. It was a great moment. It was a ton of fun to be in Bloomington for that. Curt Cignetti is awesome, and as far as I'm concerned, never going to lose a football game ever again. Alrighty, I want to talk about Steve Aird because IU coaches I'm most confident in. Number 1 is Kurt Cignetti. Number 2 is Steve Aird. Some facts and stats for Steve Aird. By the way, he was extended, so head volleyball coach for IU. He was extended. He's going to be in Bloomington until at least 2031. He's entering his 9th year in 2026. In 2025, program record 25 wins. First Sweet 16 appearance in 15 years. Also, by the way, hosted the first and second round of the NCAA tournament because they were a 4 seed. They were high enough seed to host the first couple rounds. Finished the season number 13 in the AVCA poll. 20-plus win seasons in 2 of the last 3 years. Steve Aird, clearly very accomplished and amazing. I was in Wilkinson Hall for the second round NCAA tournament game match against Colorado. I was calling the game for WIUX alongside my guy Cooper Schoenberg. It was a lot of fun. Wilkinson Hall was awesome. I understand this is the NCAA tournament, but it's my understanding through word of mouth that Wilkinson Hall is always like that, where it's absolutely rocking and it's a great time and very, very fun. Indiana, since the start of the 2022 season, is 40-15 inside Wilkinson Hall, and that includes Big Ten play, right? That's incredible. In the NCAA tournament against Colorado, it was essentially a 4-seed, 5-seed game, very close one. Colorado, obviously, a great program. Indiana won in straight sets, but what I saw, I was freaking out over Steve Aird live on the air in that moment. I was super impressed with his coaching job. What jumped out the most to me is in an NCAA tournament match, right, there's multiple sets, and I believe set 1 and set 3, this is true. In set 1 and set 3, Colorado had early leads, right? So Colorado had the momentum. They looked like they really punched Indiana in the mouth and quieted the crowd very early in set 1. They did the same in set 3. In particular, in set 1, it looked like Colorado probably had the upper hands and had an opportunity to win the set and maybe win the match on the road to advance to the Sweet 16. That was how it felt, right, inside Wilkinson Hall. To me, I'm sure I wasn't the only one. And Indiana battled back. There's a discipline aspect there. This is a very, very young team. And, the discipline being completely unfazed by a great team, again, kind of punching you in the mouth early on, that speaks to the coaching job. But what stuck out the most to me was he probably took 3 timeouts, 1 in each set. However many timeouts he took, I'm just going to assume 3. Each and every one of them in each of those sets was perfectly timed. Like the first moment that it crossed my mind of, this is looking a little sketchy. Maybe we should take a timeout here. Instantly there's a whistle and there's a timeout and Steve Aird has a clipboard. And you don't see that very often, right? A lot of times you're watching games and there's a moment where, okay, they call a timeout, makes sense, kind of a bad sequence, but maybe a little bit premature. Or you're watching a game and you're just begging the coach to take a timeout and you're waiting for it, and then they finally take it a little bit later than you would have anticipated. The lead is a little bit larger, the deficit is a little bit smaller than you would have hoped. And the timeout would have been taken earlier. But each and every time, all of those timeouts for Steve Aird, perfectly timed. And particularly in set 3, Indiana mounts a fabulous comeback to win set 3 and ultimately win the match. And that obviously was sparked by a timeout. Each and every one of those timeouts were taken at a perfect moment, and each and every one of those timeouts led to great success for Indiana. Whether it was a 4-0, 5-0 scoring run or just clear Indiana taking back control of the set and taking back control of the match, the timeouts, again, at opportune moments, in the perfect moments, and clearly had a massive impact on the performance of the team. And that said a lot to me. That really, again, encouraging. It felt great in the arena to be, I was on the air on a neutral radio station, but secretly, obviously, cheering for IU. And it just felt amazing knowing that Steve Aird's got this, right? The coach has got this one under control. If it ever feels sketchy, Steve Aird knows what to do in those situations. So that jumped out to me a great deal. Also, just fundamentally, to have a very young team that has at least 6 freshmen regularly contributing to the lineup, right? Regularly rotating into Big Ten volleyball action, and those being freshmen in their first semester on campus, on a college campus. 6 of them regularly contributing to those rotations, and to have a team that young, plenty of underclassmen leading the charge, right? And, there were obviously veteran leaders in the locker room as well, but to have that young team, coach them to the NCAA tournament in 25 wins, and then coach them to the Sweet 16, despite, again, being completely punched in the mouth multiple times by Colorado early. And there were moments as well where Indiana was executing actions that seemed to be pretty central to their game plan, and Colorado was parrying those blows time and time again. 3-4 times in a row where there was a particular action or a particular set that wasn't working straight up, and they just stuck to those fundamentals. And it's a great coaching job to to teach the discipline to ensure that what got them to the second round of the NCAA tournament is going to be what gets them through the second round of the NCAA tournament. And sure enough, it's those same actions, it's those same sets that lead to success later in the set and in the match, and ultimately leads to victories. Very well coached team. It was apparent, right? Not only the timeouts, not only the coaching in the timeouts, which I haven't been privy to, right? It's not like I was in the huddle, but clear improvements in play immediately upon timeouts for Indiana. And they look great. Again, a young team. They appeared very well coached and very disciplined. They were unfazed by those punches to the mouth. They looked awesome. And they looked awesome in large part, clearly, like visibly, tangibly. It was clear that Steve Aird had a massive impact on the success of this team, obviously also being the one that kind of built the team in the first place. And I'm very happy that he's going to be in Bloomington for the next however many years. I guess that's 5 years through 2031 at minimum. And I have really, again, a young core. It's kind of similar to IU women's basketball, a young core and a group that clearly can expand on its success and build upon the foundation that it has created. And one that in a couple of years could even be in contention to, go on big runs in the NCAA tournament, go on long runs in long winning streaks in the Big Ten, and just across the board. This is a group that I have a ton of confidence in, and I'm super excited. I'm super excited to see where IU volleyball goes, because I think it's going to go to great, previously unfound heights in the NCAA volleyball scene. And Steve Aird is going to obviously have a lot to do with that. And again, very excited about it. Probably my second favorite coach at IU. If it wasn't for Curt Cignetti, who may be the best coach of any sport of all time, Steve Aird would be my favorite coach at IU at the moment. And again, just very happy to see him extended. So I wanted to talk about that. I think that happened yesterday, maybe 2 days ago, at the time of recording this, that he was, officially extended and had agreed to a contract. And I'm thrilled. I'm excited. I'm interested, and I'm looking forward to seeing how IU volleyball progresses. I'll be excited to watch them in person and on TV next season when they, enter Wilkinson Hall once again for more NCAA action. All right, that's what I have for this episode. We're going to be a little bit over an hour, which I love. This is, perfect timing, right about an hour. I love that. 5 topics. It's all working out very well. I appreciate you all for listening or watching, especially if you're listening or watching all the way to the 1 hour, and now it's going to be the 2-minute mark. Again, appreciate you a great deal for that. I will be back probably tomorrow to discuss. I know the IU men's basketball team plays tonight. I'll be watching them. I'll be watching a lot of college basketball tonight. I have thoughts on some other teams. Iowa and Minnesota men's basketball played last night. That game was super fun. I have some thoughts on some women's basketball teams. Oregon upsetting USC was a big one. So some Big Ten basketball on the men's and women's side thoughts coming up for me, sort of in the next few days, next few weeks as the season sort of develops a little bit more. But probably going to be back tomorrow. Maybe going to be back the day after that as well. Obviously, once I go back to Bloomington next week and get back into classes, then the frequency of episodes is going to drop off a little bit. But certainly excited to keep this thing moving and hoping that the video portion of the show is working out well, and looking forward to kind of developing that as the year of 2026 progresses. And I appreciate you all being on this ride with me. I appreciate you all watching and or listening and tuning in this afternoon. And I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and I will talk to you again next time.